I would love to start with saying Excellencies. It's a great pleasure, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, to open this event jointly organized by GIZ and Agora Transport Transformation, which is on pathways on advancing e-mobility in Africa. And it's in the context of 2 or 3 years cooperation already between GIZ and Agora Verkehrswende, Agora Transport Transformation, on sustainable transport on the African continent. Because when we started this discussion and this project, it was pretty clear that the continent of the 21st century is Africa, with the expected growth and the population, with the expected growth in economic terms, that this will go hand in hand with more mobility and also more motorization on the African continent. And if this will be done in a sustainable way, in a way that is also leading to a pathway to zero emissions, that this is not only, a big opportunity for meeting our climate targets, but it's a big opportunity for the continent for sustainable growth, for more jobs, for economic enhancements, and also a great chance for the cooperation between Europe, Germany, and the African continent. And in this regard, after 2 and 3 years' time of working with our distinguished partners, with a lot of, now I can say, also friends on the African continent in really, and I would not say countless, but numerous workshops and meetings together, we can say that I think we are electrified, not only by the idea of electrification, but also by the idea of jointly working together on this issue. That's why it's really, this day makes not only my week, it makes the whole year for me, because we have, it doesn't come to an end, but we have a milestone here in this cooperation, which I'm very proud of, together with my colleagues at Agora, but also with our partners at GIZ. Therefore, we are really happy and honored to have today excellencies and representatives from the embassies of really important African countries, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, Guinea, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Republic of Chad, Ghana, and Equatorial Guinea, which I think it's really a sign of trust and a sign for friendship that you also join this meeting today. It means a lot for us that you are coming to this event. I will just quickly go through the agenda with you before we dive into the content of today's meeting. Unfortunately, I have to say that the keynote by Dr. Bärbel Kofler, the Parliamentary State Secretary to the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, will not take place. Unfortunately, Dr. Kofler is at the moment in the Budgetary Council of our Parliament to fight for the budget of the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, for hopefully also extending our cooperation. So we were okay with this decision, let's say it this way. So we will start with the keynote speech of Achim Steiner. Achim was joining Agora Verkehrswende in 2016 when the Agora started to work as a chair of the Council of Agora Transport Transformation. And I mean, he is responsible for a lot what is the characteristic of Agora today. And therefore, it's a great pleasure to have you here as the former administrator of United Nations Development Program and also the former UN Under-Secretary and General Executive Director of United Nations Environmental Program on the African continent for a long time, also living in Kenya, in Nairobi. So there is, from my point of view, no better person to give this keynote speech than you, after now having also a little bit more liberty, not working for the UN administration anymore. Following afterwards, we have a presentation on some of the findings of our products. I'm happy that this will be done by our friends Gladys and my colleague Neville from Agora on the African way to e-mobility. And then we have a panel discussion, and I will introduce the panelists, which we are very happy about later on in the discussion. So in this sense, once again, thank you very, very much for coming and joining us today for the discussion. And I'm very happy to now also first thank Ingrid-Gabriela Hoven for the, hosting us today in this wonderful building of GIZ, and giving now the floor to Achim for the keynote speech. Achim, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us for this important event today.
Thank you, Christian, for your opening remarks. Thank you also, Ingrid, for hosting us in this beautiful building that GIZ has in Berlin. And above all, thank you for the amazing partnership that I think Agora and GIZ have, in a sense, incubated, but very much, I think, at a moment in time where Africa is seriously contemplating its choices, its imperatives. And so, Excellencies, to you also a very warm welcome. I think it is a time in which thinking about transitions and transformations of our transport systems, mobility platforms, is not something that only happens somewhere between Beijing and Berlin, or perhaps between Oslo and somewhere in Madrid. There is sometimes the temptation to think these are things that are still very much the preoccupation or prerogative of a few countries. Nothing could be further from the truth today. And I am very conscious when I stand particularly with distinguished representatives from the continent of Africa here that I do not in any way wish to prejudge where Africa's choices will take it. But one thing that I think we should be very conscious of is that in this particular moment in time, there is no longer an argument that is structurally justified to argue that a country should not seriously be considering where does it view the transfer of people and goods and its infrastructure 10 years from now. And when I say 10 years, that is not an error. I think what will happen in the next 10 years is literally something that we are witnessing right now in the renewable energy universe. To many, 10 years ago, it would have been unimaginable that for much of Africa, the investment in renewable energy infrastructure becomes not only a shortcut to access to electricity, but in fact a pivot to being able to power industrialization, urbanization, to the point where energy-constrained economies, and particularly for the 600 million citizens across the continent of Africa, still is a reality. Not having access to electricity suddenly becomes almost turned upside down. But these things, as we all know, in the world of development don't happen by themselves. And I think, therefore, my congratulations, first of all, to Agora and to GIZ, also together with your partners, for having engaged with Africa, not as a continent into which one wants to export an idea, but rather to share the sometimes painful, confusing, and let's also acknowledge it, fraught with setbacks, journey that countries have gone through to arrive at a point where they are today. And I say this also very humbly, but also with a degree of preoccupation, that I stand in the capital of a country that, by virtue of its history and its automotive industry, should today already be one of the economies where the transition in terms of mobility platforms should be something that is almost concluded. But as you know, it's not always that straightforward. And the fact of the matter is that we now see in many countries across the world, large and small, rich and less rich, essentially a set of public policy choices being made that define the trajectory with which countries enter into a mobility transition and energy transition. If I tell you right now that a country like Uruguay today produces over 90% of its electricity with renewables, or indeed a country like Kenya, and the number of countries continues to grow, some people might say, how is that possible? And we struggle to get to 20 to 30, and in Europe we are now in some economies at the 40, 50, a couple perhaps at the 60, 70% margin, which, by the way, again, 10 years ago, many predicted would lead to a collapse of our energy grids. None of that has happened. We have seen an energy revolution where the International Energy Agency estimates that last year close to 90%, I think, is the number of new electricity generating infrastructure worldwide was renewable. Unbelievable numbers, if you think about it. Why do I make the analogy or go back a little bit to renewable energy? I would argue that for any decision maker across any country and economy right now, what is becoming increasingly evident is that we will probably see an even faster transition in the mobility sector than we have witnessed in the energy sector. Much of the technology and the patents that underpin our so-called green energy or clean energy revolution, they are 50 to 100 years old. They were in the drawers of corporate strategists, of university academics, of innovators and inventors, but let's also be clear, the minute they actually began to gain traction was largely a function of a societal consensus that it was the right thing to move on to a new energy infrastructure. And as always, when we have such disruptive moments, there will, as is, legitimate also, the economy and those who benefit from an economy as it is structured today, whether it's energy supply, whether it's mobility or any other aspect, will be reluctant, because disruption means potentially a loss of revenues, potentially a loss of competitiveness. It opens the market to new entrants. So let us be very clear, the mobility sector is in part a long story of precisely this phenomenon playing out across the globe, by the way. If you think back to the 60s, it was the United States that was at the cutting edge of mobility innovation. The curve then moved to Europe again, and you could go even back further in the 20th century and say it was in Europe, it went to the United States, came back to Europe, jumped to Japan, and then became more diffuse, and you saw elements of it re-emerging in California, I would argue, perhaps 15 years ago. But meanwhile, in a country called China, a very fundamental decision was taken to find an answer to how would you fuel, and I use that term very deliberately, an economy of 1.4 billion people that was just beginning to open up in a global trade regime to essentially a export push by particularly Western and Japanese producers of vehicles into the Japanese market. And certainly every Chinese citizen would be open to the idea that having a car is a great thing. But if you have no oil and you have no gas, then this becomes a great liability. So many different journeys lead countries to essentially reach a point at which a fundamental debate about what kind of development pathway do we want to choose. I frame this because sometimes when we talk about electric mobility or just clean energy mobility platforms, it is a little bit like an act of faith. we are not gathering in a church that believes in one technology or another necessarily. I think what we do see is, one, an imperative to decarbonize our economies, but secondly, also an opportunity to grow our economies, to create jobs, to create new platforms on which industry, citizens, goods and services can travel, be they the digital highways or be they the physical highways. In a country like Uruguay, about 7 years ago, the Ministry of Finance commissioned a study to examine whether it would be cheaper to continue to subsidize private transport companies, which are the backbone of public transport in Uruguay, by subsidizing the diesel imports, or would it actually make sense to subsidize the capital expenditure cost of importing electric buses as a way of making transport still something that was affordable? Remarkably, Uruguay's Ministry of Finance found that subsidizing the importation of buses into Uruguay would in fact be economically far more rational. Now that's one context. Let's fast forward to the continent from which both of you come. On the continent of Africa, very different scenarios are playing out right now. Look to Ethiopia, and there essentially, I think it is $6 billion, please don't hold me to the number, but I think that is roughly the cost of importation of fuel every year to Ethiopia's economy. A country that, with a massive hydropower generating capacity now has excess power. A fundamentally economic decision, but in a radical political decision, led essentially to the ban of the importation of petrol and diesel cars almost a year and a half ago, I think it is now, Christian, which by any standards anywhere in the world would be considered to be a high risk and extremely tough policy decision. Now, I've been watching from afar. I also asked our colleagues at Agora again, what didn't happen in Ethiopia is that all transport came to a standstill. In fact, charging stations are popping up all over the country. Hundreds of millions are being saved already in terms of fuel cost importation. But obviously the fleet of cars that are there, particularly for those areas in the economy that are not connected to an electric charging grid yet, will continue to run. And as some of you know, in Africa, sometimes cars seem to run a lot longer than, let's say, a German manufacturer would like them to in terms of market replacement. But be that as it may, another logic emerged that drove the way in which a country like Ethiopia took an economic rationale to mobility transition. Let me pivot for a moment a little bit further south to Rwanda. We were just talking with the master also about how Rwanda's long-standing vision of going into a green economy, transition economy, was hampered by essentially a market limitation, a financing limitation, and also an investment challenge of how do you actually begin to make an affordable transition also a viable business model in an economy like Rwanda. And again, the interesting thing is when finally an operator came up with the idea that you're not trying to subsidize the sale of an electric motorcycle, which is the people's taxi, but you actually create a battery swapping station. So the motorcycle taxi driver drives in and in 30 seconds, battery out, charge battery in, off they go. From day one, cheaper to run for the taxi operator. And ultimately, I think, I don't know whether you have the numbers, I don't have them, but I mean, that model is gaining, not only in Rwanda, but across East Africa and many other parts of the continent, rapidly, numbers that perhaps even 2 years ago we would not have thought possible. I choose a last example for the rationale of rethinking mobility, and that has to do with Kenya. Again, a country that many would not believe produces 90% roughly or 88% of its electricity with renewables today. And not hydropower, in contrast to Ethiopia, it's in fact geothermal and it's wind power largely. In part, a strategic decision 10, 15 years ago that with climate change and the changing rainfall patterns, the limited number of dams and hydropower infrastructure was already becoming an Achilles heel to electricity generating production. And so the choice to actually go for the largest wind farm, to exploit something that many 20 years ago thought is science fiction, drilling a hole in the ground and running with hot air a turbine, is today the backbone of continuous power supply in Kenya. The greatest challenge for renewable energy in the country today is not the economics. It now becomes the challenge of we need more demand in order to justify economically the expansion of a renewable energy infrastructure. So either you move into a new sector, industrialization, but that will take 10, 20 years. You could pick a more short-term, perhaps winner called green hydrogen. Namibia is very much a country exploring the frontiers of that right now, which needs a lot of renewable energy to work. Or you move your transport sector onto an electric platform, because with that you generate the demand with which to justify further investment that produces power that can be sold as opposed to just produced. Let me quickly pivot on, because in the way that I have tried to frame my opening remarks to this meeting is to, one, avoid trying to say things that others will talk about much more competently based on the very interesting report that has now been produced, but to essentially try and draw a vision of how Africa will decide to move forward with transitioning to a new mobility platform very much in its own right and very much out of its own realities that even across the continent will vary widely. But urbanization, the enormous reliance on public transport systems, the availability in a number of African economies of many of the minerals that are fundamental to driving this new energy economy, all of this put together in a national development strategy can actually begin to get the kind of economic cost-benefit returns and also the momentum that is needed to come out of this phase when neither the financial markets nor the investors nor the technology companies really believe in you, but everybody would like you to jump. And I think what is so critical over the next few years is that, as in every country that we have seen this happen, it is when a country in strategic terms embraces a technology transition and puts in place the relevant economic policy instruments, whether it's the kind of exemptions from taxes, as in Rwanda, whether it is, as in many countries in Europe, perhaps a payment of a subsidy. You know, the array of instruments available to us are significant. But none of these translate into a transformation unless a country has both a vision and a systemic approach to driving these kinds of transformations. And I think one of the interesting things for all of us to look at over the next few years is whether out of Africa, in its very diverse set of realities, emerges a continent that sees itself actually as the next frontier of mobility transformation, as much for its own citizens as for a global climate agenda, or indeed for a Pan-African development perspective, in which industrialization alongside urbanization, job creation, will become the fundamental drivers of decisions that may in 10, 15 years' time make us laugh that we thought we would still be driving an old diesel car in 2035. With these opening remarks, again, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I began many years ago my career as a GIZ project assistant, so I'm also very happy to be here. I have in June this year left my position as head of UNDP, having had the privilege of learning through the eyes of country after country that I have worked with what it is that makes development happen. And it's rarely looking at the status quo and believing it will be the same tomorrow, nor designing the future by constantly looking in your rear-view mirror. So on that note, let's embrace what is a risky and uncertain time, but certainly in Africa, I think there is far greater reasons to be optimistic and to look for partnerships that will allow the continent to also now begin to embrace a mobility transition that will not only reinforce energy, but also development objectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Achim, also for sharing this secret that you started your career as a project assistant at GIZ. I also worked for GIZ for a couple of years in Beijing, I have to say, not every German has to work for GIZ, but it helps. But it helps, at least for your professional career. I really liked what you mentioned, that what also we experienced in this project, that when we talk over the last 10 years here in Germany about e-mobility, the transformation, especially with people in the politics, in the ministries, in some of the industries, not all of the industries. We will have different representatives also here today. But you feel that those people share a lot of the pain of this transformation. And sometimes it feels that we really got stuck in this transformation, don't know if we should go on and continue the way or if we should go back. And whenever we talked with our colleagues, friends and partners in this project on the African continent about African approach to e-mobility, you feel that there is a huge enthusiasm, empathy for this transformation, because it is seen really from not from the perspective of risk and problems and challenges, but rather from the point of view of opportunities, especially economic opportunities. And I think this is something what was a fantastic finding, and sometimes it felt like holidays from working on e-mobility and the uptake of e-mobility in Germany when we were able to work on this project. So now I love to hand over the floor and the presentation to our colleague Gladys, whom we worked with for a long time in this project, and my colleague Neville Garrisip from Agora, to present some of the results, not all of them, but some of the results and some of the findings of the project we did together as a base for our joint discussion later on. So Gladys and Neville, the floor is yours. Very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Neville Garrisip. I hope I am audible. And I don't think I will try to follow after that very, very inspiring keynote from Mr. Steiner. And with Dr. Nyacheo, we will try to set the scene a little bit for the panel discussion. So Africa is on its way to electric mobility, and here I would like to show you the first solar-powered BRT that was launched in Dakar, Senegal, last year. And this is a pioneering example, lighthouse example, of truly what the transition to electric mobility can mean for the African continent. Another example, we also heard already from Mr. Steiner that the startup ecosystem in the East African countries is also a growing and inspiring example of what e-mobility can mean in terms of improving the cost and the ownership, or rather the commercial cost benefits that can result from the transition to electric mobility. So what does this mean then in the broader context for Africa? Here is a picture of the skyline of Johannesburg. 1 in 5 people in the world are Africans. In comparison, 1 in 11 are European. And in the next half a century, Africans will also have the youngest median age, or will be the youngest continent at the age of 19. In addition to this, the motorization rate for the continent today might be low, averaging about 40 to 70 vehicles per 1,000 people, but this is expected to double to about 140 vehicles per 1,000 people over the next half a century. So we can really see Africa is the awakening giant. However, we have challenges. We clearly see that fossil-based fuels are a challenge or a barrier to clean transport and mobility on the continent. For instance, that used vehicles account for about 85% of national fleets on average. Also, in addition, 80% of vehicles, of these used vehicles, do not comply to the basic vehicle emission standards. Last but not least, as mentioned earlier by Mr. Steiner, many countries spend a high share of national GDP on importing fossil fuels. And just an example to the side, in our recent study or analysis, we launched, and we can see that it is 62 times more expensive to operate a fossil-fueled vehicle as compared to an electric vehicle, for instance, in Ethiopia, and 42 times more expensive to operate a fossil fuel vehicle in Zambia as compared to an electric vehicle per 100 kilometers traveled. So we can clearly see how electric mobility can transition or can improve the socioeconomic benefits of Africa, not only from the perspective of operations and business, but also from the cost in terms of the import fuels. So, where do we stand today on status quo? I'm very happy to announce, as you might have seen on the entry, there were little postcards with this similar image. We have just launched, also referenced by Mr. Steiner, a study towards electric mobility in East Africa, exploring the current trends and policy approaches. And what we found in this study is that 21 countries currently in Africa have either adopted or are adopting electric mobility policies. In terms of the market, we see that at least there is a growing share of electric vehicles in the fleets. Ethiopia, for instance, is at 8% EV vehicle share. For Kenya, there is 100% year-on-year growth in the EV fleet, particularly in the 2- and 3-wheelers segment. So what are the enabling conditions that can drive inclusive growth for e-mobility? We've heard also, for instance, in the case of Kenya, 90% renewable electricity, and this is on average more than 80% for the front-running countries on the continent. We also see that freight is a key area, or freight is a key area, which impacts that 40% of the final goods price accounts or is based on the transport costs. Yeah, so transport costs account for 40% of the price of goods. We also see that an opportunity in the potential of jobs and economic prosperity that e-mobility can create. 26 million jobs additional by the next half a century. And we hope that this can include a greater gender share, providing opportunities for women in e-mobility commerce, in e-mobility workforce. Also, this will be presenting a large opportunity for the mass transit or mass public transportation, as more than 80% of commuters can benefit due to the electrification of public transport and fleets. Raw materials, a key term, a key cornerstone, and an opportunity to localize value chains. We understand that Africa holds almost nearly 30% of the critical raw materials that are required for the transition to electric mobility. In countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, holds nearly 70% of global cobalt reserves. South Africa, an estimated 35%, and Morocco, nearly 12% of global phosphate reserves. This presents an opportunity to localize and establish local value chains in cooperation with international partners. So what still remains to reap these benefits? We need to look at the high prohibitive costs of EV adoption, which restrict potential to attract investment into the sector. We also need to look at tariff and non-tariff barriers, which currently could potentially be addressed by the African Free Trade Continental Area, which is coming into play. Also, joint investment in infrastructure and in this technology can further yield long-term benefits for both mutual economic benefit for the African continent as well as for the European continent. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, I set the scene for Dr. Gladys to share with us some of the insights.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Neville, for setting that. Now, as you've heard from Neville, the barriers and opportunities are very clear in Africa. And my role now is to share ideas that the stakeholders came up with from a series of workshops that happened in the past year, where Agora and GIZ convened a series of co-creation workshops that brought together about 20 organizations from African countries, and they came together and brainstormed and came up with ideas on how to deal with these barriers. So these are not my ideas, just to make it clear. They are ideas from the experts. So these ideas, we call them turning points, and for the sake of this presentation, a turning point is a critical moment or action that brings possible change, which is sustainable transport, in this case in Africa. Now, I will start with the first turning point, which is African Charter on Electric Mobility. And as I said, these are not my ideas. This is a product of a series of workshops and discussions that happened in the past year. So, African Charter on E-Mobility. Why do we need that? This provides a guiding continental framework for e-mobility in Africa. So the situation is, as we say, Africa has fragmented policies. And this means that we lack a shared reference or framework for all actors, something that we all can understand in e-mobility. And what is the change that we really want to see that this change happens, that we have a framework? The change that we are talking about is a clear shared vision for electric mobility for the continent. So with a clear shared vision, then we can be working on the same level. An example that was given by the keynote speaker Achim, or about Ethiopia and the dam and the renewable energy, and also the ban for IC vehicles. Can you imagine a situation where most African countries have a charter that defines that all should follow? Do you see how that can leapfrog electric mobility in Africa? That is something we are talking about. So enacting an African Charter for electric mobility will set common principles, standards, and guidance, and policies that will help move this e-mobility very fast in African countries. So this charter will begin to harmonize and coordinate policies, e-mobility policies across Africa, and we'll see the result of uptake and also uniformity, and also justice in terms of the uptake of e-mobility in African cities. So this was the first turning point that the experts discussed and suggested that be adopted in Africa for us to have sustainable transport. So, and the next turning point is on a council for e-mobility and trade. So for this turning point, it looks at markets, trade, and industrial strategy for e-mobility. So what is the problem here? Why do we need this? Why do we need this change? So it's because our markets, African markets and industrial strategies are fragmented, because each country designs its own incentives, tariffs, and standards, and value chains are therefore shallow, and the bargaining power is very low. So we need this to bring change in this sector. And what is it that we want? What is this? What change do we want when we talk about the Council of E-Mobility and Trade? We need, or we want, an integrated African e-mobility market with regional value chains and stronger made in Africa positions in the global negotiations. That is what we envision, and that is what we need to see. So, and how do we get there? Well, how we get there is having this Council for E-Mobility and Trade, and creating a Council for E-Mobility Policy and Trade under the African Continent Free Trade Area that aligns technical standards and trade rules, local content requirements, and industrial incentives. This would be really important to leapfrog e-mobility in Africa. And this will turn the scattered national projects into a coherent continental value chain and make it a credible Made in Africa E-label for Africa possible. Okay, so we still have three more. The third turning point that was suggested by the experts in this series of workshops is the Renewable Energy Master Plan. Just still following from the example that was given by the keynote speaker, when we plan, when we talk about e-mobility demand for the future, are we also looking at renewable energy that should support that? So this turning point looks at the power systems that must support e-mobility. So what is the issue? The grids in many African countries are not stable, and most of the African countries rely on fossil fuel, as he just mentioned here. And if we don't plan for EV, and also have EV in mind as we plan, then we will not hit that mark. So we need what we call master plans for e-mobility in Africa for us to be able to make or get this change. And preparing regional and national master plans that align renewable generation, storage grid, upgrades, and smart charging is where and how EVs will actually be used in Africa. And this will lead to African e-mobility, low carbon and sustainable transformation. And this is all that we need then in the entire globe. So turning point 4 that was suggested or proposed by the experts was the Center of Excellence and Special Economic Zones. So for this turning point, we were looking at capabilities, skills, and innovation spaces for e-mobility. What does this mean? We are talking about Africa's e-mobility potential being constrained and limited. We have limits in research and development, also skill gaps, and with only a few places that are hosting serious industrial activity. So we need a strong African capabilities to research, design, build, maintain, and improve e-mobility solutions on the continent. And how do we do that? We have said that we should create centers of excellence for research and training that are actually linked to special economic zones where those skills are applied in manufacturing and assembly component production. So we cannot talk about leapfrogging, or we cannot talk about sustainable transport in Africa if we are not having the capability. So by joining these economic zones and economic zones and the centers of excellence, we have an opportunity to, at the least, have people who can move on with this e-mobility, people who are informed, people who know what we need to do to move and have sustainable development in Africa for e-mobility. And this will lead to, this shifts from Africa being a test market to being an innovation and production hub that creates quality jobs across the e-mobility value chain. So this becomes very important. And just to take also the example from the keynote, in Africa, transport is linked to livelihoods. So when you talk about transport, you're also talking about livelihood. So this becomes a very important factor in ensuring that we have sustainable transport as well as good living standards for the people. The last turning point is a scaling investment into e-mobility. And this turning point looks at finance, risk, and affordability for e-mobility. Look at this example. In 2025 January, in Rwanda, there will be no new registrations for motorcycles that are not electrical. So this means that if I want to start a business as a boda boda rider, and I cannot afford that motorcycle, what happens to me? So even when EVs are cheaper over the lifetime, the upfront cost is too high, and the finance product do not fit the reality of the riders, for example. We would sell the idea that EVs are good, that will be bought, but how do we access them to use them, and especially now that is also a livelihood. We also know that green finance is fragmented and often inaccessible, and especially for the small players. So what is this change that we want? The change we want is that e-mobility that is both investable and affordable, and which takes into consideration the African realities that we know, that I've just said. So by setting up national e-mobility financing facilities that are aligned to the continental level, that blend public, private, and concessional capital and offer tailored products for different types of users, then we can move. And this all ties up to the first turning point that we talked about, having an African charter. You see, it is like a thread that comes down to join all these key turning points that I've mentioned. So this move to electric mobility from isolated donor-funded pilots into mainstream practice across Africa, the market is what we need. We don't need isolated, small-time donations here and there. We need something systematic, just like the keynote speaker said. That way, we are able to follow through and see that there is progress happening. So by realizing all the 5, that is having an African charter, having a council under the African Continent Free Trade Area, having master plans for renewable powered grid, and also centers of excellence and special economic zones, then if we have all those 5 turning points that we have just mentioned, Africa will make big strides in advancing e-mobility, and we'll see a lot of change, both in the standards of living of the people and also in the carbon footprint. Thank you very much.
We hand back to Christian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gladys and Neville, for this inspiring presentation, and also with the 5 turning points, which we, or not we, but the experts in our joint workshops were discussing as having the highest priority for making the change in Africa for advancing e-mobility. And it's also now the basis for our discussion, which will be now concluding our workshop today. And I'm very happy that we have also experts from the continent now discussing this with us, and also experts from the industry. And therefore, I changed the place over to our panel, and would like to also give the panel to our distinguished guests. And we have also one guest online, which is Eric from the African Union, the Director for Transport, also joining us online. Eric, great also to have you with us. And I would like to get also the other panelists, please, to the floor. I will introduce one by one later on. But I would love to start with Eric online, because he has to do a lot with the first turning point which we established, or which we put into the report, which is the African Union Charter on E-Mobility. And Eric, it would be great, first of all, welcome very much. You are in Addis at the moment. Even if the background looks a little bit like it's not this planet anymore, but another planet. But happy to have you with us from Addis. And maybe from your point of view, also from the African Union perspective, why do you think that e-mobility in Africa plays an important role? And where do you see the way from here for Africa in advancing e-mobility on the continent?
Thank you very much, Program Moderator. I hope you can hear me very well.
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Head of Transport and Mobility Division. I'm also very happy to say that I was part of the workshop that my colleagues mentioned in terms of the 5 turning points. I was honored to be invited by GIZ and Agora to be part of that. One workshop was held in Kigali, which is also my home city, so I was very happy to be part of the whole discussion. And I'm also here representing the African Union Commission. Our director, Dr. Kamugisha Kazaura, who has been corresponding with our colleagues from GIZ, was not able to join and nominated me to be here. But apart from this opportunity, we had a very successful Africa E-Mobility Week. I want to thank our colleagues from GIZ, Agora, and also others from UNEP and UNECA who were part of this important event, which was held in Addis Ababa. Just quickly on your question, first of all, I wanted to mention that the e-mobility sector stands under our Infrastructure and Energy Department of African Union Commission. So this is, as you know, this is a new sector we are trying to develop, but we agreed to put it under the Transport and Mobility Division with the simple reason that electric mobility is not isolated. It is part of the entire transport ecosystem. We are dealing with the sectors under transport, especially road transport. We are dealing with road safety action plan for the decade 2020, 21, 2030. We are harmonizing transport regulations on the continent. We are also doing a lot on the developing of our transport corridors, which is very critical when it comes to electric mobility. But we are also working under energy. We have an energy division, which is mainly supporting us in terms of increasing energy access, developing renewable energy initiatives. We also have one flagship program under that energy division called Africa Single Electricity Market. So these are the reason why we thought that e-mobility should be part of this division. Now, I can mention three main points that are like imperatives for electric vehicles in Africa. I think my colleagues have touched on and have given very good statistics. I will not go into many details. The first one is that there is a high proportion of commercial vehicles in Africa's vehicle fleet. The second one is that there is economically attractive business case for electric mobility. This is because electric mobility has shown that it can create jobs via for example, the EV assembly, but also the local manufacturing. We have a very young population in Africa, so it's an opportunity for job creation. We have a lot of initiative on TVETs in Africa, whereby we have technical schools that can be, taken as an advantage or opportunity to develop this sector. And we also have aspects of urbanization that the continent is looking at, the urbanization and sustainable mobility, but also the issue of responding to agenda aspects, especially reduction of CO2 emission or decarbonization of the transport sector. Then the last one, I can also mention that FCFTA integration is very critical. The African Continental Free Trade Area, which was launched in 2017 and came into force and is under operations, is dealing with many aspects that can assist in terms of developing this sector, especially when it comes to trading services. So there is a protocol under this FCFTA which is on trading services, and that is where I think they proposed the turning point on the Continental Council on Trade and E-Mobility can be anchored under. So the last reason that I can mention is also very important is the natural resources endowment. In Africa, we have abundant renewable energy potential. I think the examples have been given for Ethiopia, for Kenya, where we have a lot of hydro power, we have a lot of renewable energy, geothermal in East Africa, we have a lot in Northern Africa. So we have abundant renewable energy potential, and we also have a critical minerals capacity in terms of cobalt, lithium for batteries. So for me, these are the few reasons I can mention that this e-mobility is very critical, but overall it comes into the global transport system that the continent is looking at. Having a vast continent, we need to develop transport system, but we cannot develop a transport system without also tackling climate change agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, but I have one additional question for you, which is what do you see is the role of the African Union in developing this agenda further?
Thank you very much. I think as also in the line with the 5 turning points, let me first of all say that the African Union Commission has that convening power to bring together all the 55 states. This is a first point I can mention. We have a specialized technical committee of ministers of transport and energy who meet once in 2 years, and the ministers come and discuss the different initiatives and come up with a recommendation which are taken later to the heads of state. So that convening power is very important as the first role. The second role is that we are also working with the regional economic communities who are very building blocks when it comes to, for example, aspects of EV regulations, adopting standards and also regulations, harmonizing among the states, but also that capacity to mobilize resources. Being resources technical and also financial with our key partners. The African Union Commission is a trusted institution in terms of mobilizing resources. For example, we are working very hand in hand with GIZ in various areas, especially under infrastructure and energy. So I can say that our key role is to bring the continent together in a harmonized way. I can mention that our role, first of all, as we speak today, we are in the process of completing an e-mobility framework for the continent. We developed it in collaboration with UNEP and UNECA, UN Economic Commission for Africa. And this e-mobility framework has key pillars, and one of the pillars actually is the e-mobility charter that was mentioned as a first turning point. The framework has 6 pillars. The first one is to promote local manufacturing, assembling regional value chains. The second one is to accelerate infrastructure and energy system readiness. The third one is expanding access to finance and incentives. I think there were a lot of examples of incentives that countries are giving, but we want to have it as a coordinated approach at continental level. What type of incentives can we learn maybe from a country that has already given incentives, a country like Rwanda who has reduced the taxes for private sector to buy more vehicles and electric vehicles and be able to increase the volumes. So we can learn from the states and bring a continental approach for these incentives. The fourth pillar is the regional cooperation and EV development. The fifth one is the supply side regulations, vehicle performance standards, developing common standards, and progressive zero emission vehicle targets. And the last one is ensuring sustainability and environmental consideration. So all of these ones are now going to be cumulated into establish a coordinated governance and monitoring mechanism. So this continental governance is going to be through an e-mobility charter. I think my predecessor mentioned the objective of this charter, but I can give an example of one of the charters that we have already developed and has already entered into force, because a charter needs at least 15 African countries to ratify and deposit 3 instruments of ratifications. So the road safety charter, which was it has already been ratified by 15 states, and this charter is already giving us an opportunity to, for example, have a coordinated approach of collecting road safety data for the continent, and also establish road safety observatories, which bring together all African road safety agencies to be able to support road safety. So we want to do the same for the e-mobility, be able to bring all these initiatives, all these efforts together, and then also talk to our partners in one voice as a continent. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. This reminds me that this is a workshop under Chatham House rules, because Eric was referring to a document which has not been approved right now, right? It has to be approved later or early next year from the African Union or within the African Union. So until then, it seems to be confidential. Wonderful to have another guest from the African continent with us. It's Ada Fatih from Morocco. She's head of department for the automotive industry in the Ministry for Industry and Trade. And if you look from outside to Morocco, this seems to be the best place for e-mobility ever. Abundant renewable energies, access to resources, a lot of, not always, but you will let us know how this paradise for e-mobility will develop over the next years in Morocco.
Good evening, everyone, Excellencies, honorable assistants, and ladies and gentlemen. I want to first thank the GIZ for the invitation, and I'm very pleased to be here and to share Morocco's experience. It's not a paradise because we don't have the chance that things are not changing. We are, and especially automotive and EV mobility are in trouble. Everyone here knows very well that. In Morocco, we have been working to define our priorities, and as it has been said earlier, to set objectives, to define the levers to achieve these objectives, and to reevaluate the priorities and the pathways to achieve these strategies. Maybe in few words regarding e-mobility and the link with industry, because industry is one of the levers, but there are many levers to succeed to implement e-mobility in Africa and Morocco. So first, e-mobility is a part of our vision and our strategies. When we talk about strategy, is industry, energy efficiency, renewables, transport. And the vision was set by His Majesty the King Mohammed VI, may God assist him, and who placed immobility, who placed the industrial sovereignty, technological leadership, and green transport at the heart of Morocco's future. So we are trying to align our strategies with the global climate objectives. We started by making our investment environment and our business climate very friendly to investment, both domestic and international investment. We also work on levers. Training, it's key, because it's not enough to have abundant capital, human capital. We need to train. We need to train and to cover and to follow technology shifts. And in Morocco, we have financed training institutions. Mm-hmm. And these training institutions in automotive are managed by the private sector, because we are not expert as the companies who are involved every day in technology and managing the constraints. So first, human capital, training. Second, infrastructure. We invested massively to link Morocco to international platforms. We also succeeded to cover many parts of this value chain of e-mobility. We are talking about mineral resources. We have, if we talk about phosphate, we have 70% of the global reserves of phosphate, and it is important. When we are talking about e-mobility, we are thinking of batteries, and one of the most, right now, competitive technology is LFP. So phosphate is within this LFP technology. And we succeeded to make Morocco attractive. So we succeeded to invest and co-invest with experts. The keynote spoke about a country called China. So we succeeded to co-invest with China to develop upstream activities in the battery. And of course, we also manufactured vehicles, cars, so the downstream, not only ICE, electric, hybrid. And we made the choice to open our economy very early. So Morocco has signed many free trade agreements, so we also allow access to market, and it is a key. So competitiveness, market training, and densify the value chain, because it is very important. It's directly linked to the competitiveness. And bottom line, every country in this EV mobility or transition needs to manufacture and to sell affordable cars for people. Because if there is no market, there is no industry.
Let me ask you another question. You're close to the European Union. You're already exporting cars and vehicles to the European Union. If I would ask you, is the Morocco strategy on e-mobility rather being lead supplier or being lead market for e-mobility? Both.
So we need to be competitive and to develop the industry. It's one of the levers. And we need market. And in Morocco, we believe that Africa is a unique opportunity for Morocco and the rest of African countries. Because as it was said, this is the continent of the 21st century. The needs are huge. we're talking about e-mobility. We can fragmentate. In Africa, I see the biggest opportunity is the micro-mobility, the 2- and 3-wheelers, the small EV cars. And in Morocco, and with partnership with African countries, we believe that Africa has a unique opportunity to position itself in this EV transition and create create a sustainable ecosystem, because we are talking about ecosystem efficiency. And Morocco can play and is playing a role in this ecosystem in terms of industry, in terms of energy transition, energy efficiency. And if I may, I would to comment what Eric said.
Sure.
Regarding Africa, because it is the future, and no strategy is built in very short term, so we need this long-term vision. And I believe that the recipe for Africa is regional cooperation. Why? 3 main reasons. First is value chains, and African countries have complementary strengths through the value chains, from minerals transformation, expertise in technology, R&D, engineering, industry capabilities, and of course human capital. Second is energy, and we saw very successful experiences in Kenya and other African countries in terms of energy. Africa have abundant renewable energy resources, and it will help to scale up this cooperation. And third is market, and we talked about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which provide powerful framework to develop and to expand intra-African trade. It is a unique opportunity to diversify our economies and to create more value-added economies. Economies.
Thanks very much. Welcome back, I can say.
Thank you.
Welcome, Edna Mercy.
Thank you.
Edna is one of our distinguished fellows at Agora, of the Agora GIZ Fellowship Program, which we developed for sustainable transport and also e-mobility. And you were participating in this fellowship as Ayan, the colleague from Eric, also participated there. And for me, it was like making 15 new friends, which were at our fellowship program, because when I was in Pretoria only a couple of weeks ago, I went through the supermarket and someone was saying, "Christian, what are you doing here?" And it was one of our 15 fellows. So it's good to meet again. And now we meet again here in Berlin. And I'm also honored and pleased that you decided to participate in building an African think tank, also on mobility, on sustainable mobility, on e-mobility. And therefore, I ask, what did we do right that you think tanks play an important role also on Africa's agenda and developing African pathways for e-mobility?
Thank you so much. I'm feeling honored to be back in Berlin to speak about something that we formed in 2023 in Kenya, in Naivasha. So Christian happened to be in that lab. We were in Naivasha with the GIZ lab, and part of the participants of the lab it was very fortunate that we happened to just have 6 PhD students amongst us in the laboratory. So it was quite interesting because we came together as the 6 PhD students and we sat down and we told ourselves that we needed to come up with an idea that will leapfrog e-mobility that has to do with the research. So we had a conversation with Christian in one of the days in the bus, and Christian was talking about Agora, how it was formed, and what it does for Germany, and we thought that was a brilliant idea. So initially we had thought of a center of excellence, but I think town sounded more interesting, and we were curious to know what can we do if we had an African think tank. So over the last 2 years, we've gone through a lot in terms of learning what a think tank does as we also work with our think tank. And one thing I would say that really inspired us, if you go to the Agora website, for example, you will see a lot of publications with a lot of data and a lot of research that has been done just to be able to influence decision-making in the German government, especially when it comes to transport. So that was one of our biggest motivators, because a lot of data and facts are needed to be able to convince government stakeholders and policymakers that we need this kind of policy. I'll give an example. Something that we talk about a lot is how do you convince a boda rider in Africa to buy a boda? They would want to see the numbers and be able to tell, this is going to be cheap for me. But who does that research? It is we, the PhD students, we, the doctors in Africa, we, the think tanks in Africa, that are able to give people that evidence-based information that can be able to make them decide, I want to buy a boda, or I don't want to buy a boda that is electric. That is a motorcycle that is electric. So I would definitely say Agora has been very instrumental, and GIZ for the opportunity they gave us to be in that lab and to be able just to meet and learn so much that can be done for Africa. And being part of the GIZ Fellowship and Agora Fellowship here in Berlin, we were there for 4 weeks just being able to understand what is needed to be able to push for certain policies in Africa, and also what kind of data is necessary for us to be able to make decisions in Africa. So I would say definitely learning a lot from you guys was our inspiration, and meeting you in person in Naivasha was one of our biggest Kickstarter for the conversation that we needed to have to start the think tank. Thank you.
The thanks and the gratitude is also on our side, because I think we also learned a lot, and we are now very happy to be part of this network of think tanks between Germany, between Agora, and also the think tanks now which are forming on the African continent, because we are quite convinced that the solutions will not come from us at Agora or at any part in Germany, but from the African continent, and that we will definitely learn a lot also for the German transformation from the African situation. And as you were working also for UN Habitat with a lot of other issues on mobility, like keeping cycling and walking in Africa, switching to public transport, developing further public transport, also switching to other transport modes, to more sustainable transport modes. What role do you think that e-mobility plays in this whole realm of sustainable mobility on the way forward for Africa? What is the puzzle stone, so to say, e-mobility adds to this transformation?
Thank you. So I would say at UN Habitat, one of the key things is we use the framework called avoid, shift, improve. So for us, we're always telling people that before you get to improve, you have to avoid and shift. So first of all, we advocate for less travel. Don't do unnecessary travel if you don't have to. If you don't have to use a car to go somewhere, you don't need to do that. And then after we tell you to avoid the unnecessary travel, we get to a situation where if you can't avoid it, at least use a sustainable mode of transport. So can we use public transportation, that is electric buses, for sure, not ICE buses, or can you use an electric rail, for example, or a tram? Yeah, but then now, when it's not possible to have just the sustainable transport as the option, that is where we bring in the improve, and we tell you that, oh, don't forget cycling and walking and sustainable transport. I'm very sorry. Yeah, so after we have said at least shift to a sustainable mode of transport, and is not possible, that's when we bring in the aspect of, can the mode that you're choosing that we don't like be sustainable? If you have to drive a car, can it be at least electric? So when we think about electrification in Africa, we are thinking, if you look, for example, at countries like Kigali and Ethiopia, they're very mountainous. So you find that there's that whole aspect of someone would want to cycle, but then for a very long distance, it would be very difficult because it's a very hilly terrain. So we are thinking, what magic can an electric bicycle do in such a terrain? So we are thinking definitely the technology has to be brought in to supplement that sustainable transport mode that you're choosing. So that is where electrification definitely comes in Africa. We're thinking if you're going to integrate another mode of transport, even if it's a motorcycle, because it's inevitable in some situations, then at least let the motorbike be electric. So that is what it means when you talk about electrification. We're thinking electrifying those modes that would work to integrate to the bigger modes like the public transport modes that, because a lot of the travel in Africa happens, but then you don't get to last mile. So for that last mile that you have to get to, if you're using an electric bus, at least let's supplement that with something that is sustainable also. So that is where the electric bicycles come in, the electrical motorbikes, yeah. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Edna.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Let me come to the last, but not the least guest we have. It's really a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Andreas Kammel here, the Vice President for Alternative Drivetrains at Traton. For those who don't know Traton so well, it's the, I would say, umbrella company for the heavy or trucks and buses under the Volkswagen Group, which means MAN, Scania, and Volkswagen Trucks, hopefully. And I know that it was really hard for Andreas to make this meeting today, and I'm really grateful that he did, because I've never heard someone from the industry speaking so clearly about the reasons why it is e-mobility, which is the future, why the future is electric, also for freight. And maybe you can give us some of the ideas why you also think that e-mobility is also the future for road freight in Africa. Great to have you here, Andreas, really. Wonderful.
No pressure.
No pressure, that's right, as always.
So, thank you, everyone, for such a warm welcome, especially Christian, of course. Yeah, you already kind of nailed it. In our opinion, it's all going to be better electric. It sounds lazy and cheap on a first glance, but it's just a matter of cost and efficiency in the end. The trucking business is completely dominated by cost. And cost, especially when we talk about heavy-duty trucks, we are more heavy-duty truck manufacturer, that tends to be dominated by energy cost. And this is where the storyline comes back to what we've been discussing all afternoon. Of course, electricity, especially in Africa, tends to be much, much cheaper than diesel. That's not true in every single country. There are differences. Oil-producing countries, it's a bit harder to get to that point. But on average, in most every other country, we tend to have an organic, natural, pre-subsidy business case that is significantly better than a typical European business case, simply because the spread between electricity and diesel is so much larger. And it's not just this. The recuperation potential on top is usually higher, partially because of traffic patterns, partially because of hilliness. Ethiopia is a good example for this, and more factors come on top. And of course, still, there are challenges like the infrastructure and so on, but it's super important to keep taking away that the business case is extremely good to begin with, the organic business case. In many cases, there's a positive business case for a heavy-duty 40-ton truck today, if the infrastructure was in place. And it's just going to get better. The batteries are going to get better. Even today's batteries, we don't have to look far into the future, are much better than what most people expect. Talking about China, for example, some of those batteries can now be charged in 5 minutes. That's automotive-grade batteries. Some of those batteries would last half a century. That's crazy from a standpoint 10 years back. And of course, from a cost perspective, some of these electric trucks in China, again as an example, are already cheaper today than many diesel trucks are in Europe. So it's clear where this is going. It's already decided. It's just a matter of speed, and that speed mostly depends on infrastructure. Simply because the business case is so good, we've been modeling every single African country for almost a decade now in terms of how fast electrification comes. There have been discussions about this in the early years. One of the first opportunities we identified was in Ethiopia. Ethiopia brings basically all of this together. Landlocked country, no oil, diesel prices are high. At the same time, now GIRD is operational, the hydropower plant, tons of solar power, of course, as well. All of this conspires to make the business case one of the best. But it's not just that. We've identified more and more. That was the first one, like almost 10 years ago. But other great business cases are in Kenya, like the project Kühne, that Kühne Foundation is heavily working on right now. Basically a corridor from Mombasa to Nairobi, but it should, in my opinion, in the end actually go much further to Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, like connecting the entire region. And there's also a highly viable corridor in Morocco, basically going from Tangier, the largest port on the continent, all the way to Casablanca, Marrakesh, and Agadir. So there's a couple of corridors, and the list grows basically every month when we look at more and more opportunities down there that make a lot of sense. But Ethiopia, Kenya, Morocco, Ghana, South Africa, there are tons of examples. Sometimes we have to be careful about which corridor precisely to look at, because things like freight traffic density matter a lot, and especially if this is about moving ahead more quickly, this is all about just gaining speed, then it's very important to look at point-to-point traffic density and total freight traffic density, because then such a corridor can already be viable if it's just a couple of charging points, just a couple of trucks. And of course, the idea is not to have just a couple of trucks, but the idea is to show basically in 25, 26, 27, 28, there's a business case today, so that we don't stand around in 2032, 2035 at some point saying, oh darn, this could have worked. So it's all about speed, all about trying to build alliances, trying to build consensus and momentum in the end, and to just get this done, because it does work. We just need to get it done.
Nevertheless, I have to confront you with other industry representatives saying, like the president of the VDA, other parts of the world, and I think she refers a lot to Africa, will drive a lot in the long time with combustion engines. What is your guess on this?
Chatham rules, right? I see like 4 cameras. No, we are not legally obliged to have the same opinion, to be fair. Yeah. And of course, there are some hurdles, there are some challenges. Capital cost is one, infrastructure is one, etc. But there are smart ways around this. And having these proof points, these lighthouse projects, I think that matters. Because that brings this theory into reality. Like we talked about Morocco earlier, in theory, the paradise. In reality, there are still some obstacles. But I think they can be overcome. And for that, usually all it takes is to gain some momentum, to have one showcase, to have one lighthouse project, basically. And then investors start, well, lining up at some point. There is money on this planet. And this is one of the arguably easier investments to make, even for investors like retirement funds, etc. Because if you're sure, maybe that's one important subtopic then, if you're sure it's all going to be electric, then this is an easy investment. It is going to pay off, it's just going to get better. Batteries are going to get better. Utilization of that infrastructure is going to get better. The business case is just going to improve over time. The only thing we need to have clarity about, and that is sometimes a hurdle, to be fair, globally, is it just going to be better electric? Is there something else? Namely hydrogen in many cases. And the short version on this, I could probably talk about this for the rest of the day, so I won't.
Or even for a week, I heard.
The short version is, it just doesn't work. Not for mainstream applications, not for at least my business, not for freight transport. Mm-hmm. Mostly driven by the lower energy efficiency. So energy cost is much higher. At the same time, the system complexity on the truck is also much worse. So it's a costlier product. It's costlier to maintain as well. Everything is costly in the end. And it gets worse in comparison. Batteries advance faster than hydrogen technology does. The theoretical ceiling from an energy density perspective is much higher than the efficiency ceiling is on the hydrogen side. So the gap that is already huge to begin with is just going to grow over time. So And even if we had, just assume for a second, if we had hydrogen lying around for $0 per kilogram, it's not going to get cheaper than that, at least not long term. There can always be subsidies. Even if we had that, there would be other off-takers that would have a better business case in comparison. So even a gas power plant, I'm not saying gas power plants will burn hydrogen, but I'm saying like at that point in time, that would at least have its pipeline access. It would be even cheaper in comparison to a truck. It would be able to operate when the wind isn't blowing, the sun isn't shining. A truck just has to drive. It would be able to do some heat coupling on top. A truck has an excess heat problem. There's no exhaust like on diesel. It's actually worse than on diesel. All of this means even if you have hydrogen lying around at $0 per kilogram, you won't see that in a truck. You will have other use cases that are more urgent before, and even if you are done with all the urgent use cases, you have other use cases that have a much better business case in comparison. And to make matters worse, with those power plants in that example, you would also bring down, of course, the price of electricity. So it's always going to be linked. You cannot have coexistence of dirt cheap green hydrogen and extremely costly electricity. So it's not going to work in 2030, it's not going to work in 2040. We are actually more certain about 2040 because of the physics behind it. 2030 is more about how many subsidies are there going to be. And as long as there are subsidies, there are going to be those.
So Christmas is coming close. If you like to have a gift for a friend at home, challenge him on hydrogen in transport, you can rent Andreas for a couple of hours and sure that your friend afterwards is maybe turning to other sectors. Another word is that we were also confronted with some of, let's say, skepticism and open questions in the embassies, in the German embassies of a couple of countries, saying, okay, why should Germany and Europe cooperate preparing the market for the Chinese? MAN, as far as I know, just sold 100 buses to Cape Town, 100 electric buses. So are you afraid that, the whole continent goes to Chinese suppliers, or are you confident enough to say you will play a role there?
I think there's a kernel of truth to that fear globally, to be honest. They are awfully competitive, and that's good for developing that market, but it is a challenge for us, of course. At the same time, we all know we've tried in Europe to establish our own battery facilities, our own battery technology, and so far haven't succeeded as much as we would have liked to see that, no fault. So that would have been a key provider of batteries to us. So we, as most everyone else, are mostly focused on batteries from East Asia. And that means, in the end, if everyone is using the same batteries anyway, then there isn't that much keeping us from being competitive. The largest share of value creation in that truck, the largest share of total cost is always going to be the battery. And ideally, that would be a battery where we don't have that kind of dependency, but for the foreseeable future, for many of these chemistries, we do. At the very least, however, that means it's a level playing field to some extent. And we are good in building the rest of the truck. So there's still that portion too. Yeah. There's competitiveness to be had in that. So I think we will actually be able to compete in all markets. We also have to be competitive in Europe. The Chinese players are entering the European market on force, starting next year with Sany and others. Mm-hmm. So it's not just going to be Africa, it's going to be on in all markets. So we'll have to be competitive anyway.
Thank you. Next question goes to Eric. I'm still puzzled about your miracle, what is it? Is it rare earth? Is it scarce metals in the back of your, seems to be new materials bringing this into cooperation. No, where do you see the benefit, Eric, in cooperating from African countries' point of view with Europe or countries like Germany in the development of e-mobility on the African continent? What is in for African countries?
Thank you very much, Christian, for giving me an opportunity again. Let me start with what exactly Ida mentioned, and I wanted to to fully agree with her that starting from Africa on our own, we have a lot of opportunity for cooperation in terms of the whole value chain. When we see the challenges of e-mobility from EV charging infrastructure, issues of upstream costs, issues of having the high cost. I think countries like, for example, Morocco in the northern part of Africa can be able to cooperate with the countries in West Africa, whereby we have other means of transportation. For example, we can reduce the cost of logistics when it comes to getting these EV vehicles. Instead of getting it from maybe Asia, why can't we maybe use, if a country like Senegal can cooperate with Morocco and reduce the cost of logistics. Secondly, for example, the issues of renewable resources. We are talking about the batteries, and under our continental framework, we are trying to encourage local manufacturing and also assembling. We have already seen countries that have already taken for example, issues of assembling. If I give an example of Rwanda again, between Rwanda and, for example, Volkswagen, and they're already working together in an international cooperation aspect in terms of having that capacity. So it's very critical to, first of all, look at our potential as African countries to cooperate among ourselves in various areas of the value chain of the EV. But then that expertise that the countries out of the continent have, can we, for example, have these international partners bringing the capacity to do inspection of e-vehicles? One of the things, for example, in national study of Ethiopia, which actually we validated yesterday with the Minister of Transport and Logistics of Ethiopia. That study was done by CPCS of Canada and funded by the World Bank. One of the critical challenges that we saw was the capacity for maintenance of these e-vehicles, and also the capacity to do regular inspection, because regular inspection is very critical. If a car maybe after 3-4 years has a problem, where do we get the spare parts, and how do we maintain it? So these are the areas that we see as opportunity for international cooperation. But there is a lot we can do in the next 2-3 years as African countries to cooperate. And African Union Commission, we are really committed to bring that framework of cooperation among the states.
Thanks a lot. A very clear statement. And before we come to a close here, I would also give our auditory the chance to have questions or short comments. The pronunciation was on short. So if there is a question or a comment, please, Axel.
My name is Axel Friedrich. I work for the German Environment Agency for Transport and Noise. And my experience shows in Africa, bureaucracy is unbelievable. We talk in Germany on bureaucracy, but I tell you, if you work in Africa, it's unbelievable. And if we don't get this done, will not happen many things. Because it's the import taxes, it's the normal taxes, it's a lot of things which we cannot think about in Europe. So this, I think, is an issue we have to solve by cooperation. Second point, mobility is not cars and trucks. Mm-hmm. We are working on e-mobility also on bikes. We have now in Germany about 30 million pedelecs. Mm-hmm. Can you think about it? We have 2 million cars, but 30 million pedelecs. So unluckily, this is not in the focus in Africa at all. We can transport cargo easily, and we have projects in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. So this is not in the focus of the policy, not also in the focus of this report. They told us it's not possible to transport goods on cargo bikes. Said, why not? It's not possible in Africa. Why not? We do it here. Why not doing it there? So, and if you just replace electric cars against electric cars, it will not solve all the problems. You have congestion as before. This, I think, you have to think about. If you don't solve the other problems, it will not be possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments from the auditory? Yeah? Don't be shy.
No, thank you very, very much. Christian, I would like to ask all of you, especially the
Would you introduce yourself, or should I do it? It's Sebastian Ebold from GIZ in Morocco.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. I also started as a young project assistant one day back in China. No, my question is because we talked about electricity, because the shift is from molecules to electrons, and this will fuel the transition. But when we talk about batteries, and this is in the center of value chain creation, we talk about the value chains, the new ones from the mines to recycling with an eye to circular economy. And when we now see what's happening globally on the discussion on critical minerals and raw materials and resources, how to steer or how to balance, so to say, with regards to those resources, cooperation and competition. And this is, I leave it maybe as an open question, because this race for critical minerals, access and refining and so on, I think that's the race for the future, which we saw in the past, also for fossils, oil and so on.
I could give an answer here, but I'm the moderator, so I don't do so. So it's Andreas now. Do this.
Maybe just not a full answer, but one comment on this that may create some optimism in here. Our average calculation result for our recycling rates is around 105 to 110%. That sounds weird. It is weird, because we include the energy density increases over time in those batteries. So those recycling rates inch ever closer to 100%. At the same time, we don't need the same amount of materials for the next battery, assuming it's the same chemistry, some complexities from that. And that means we still have an environmental impact with that, to be fair, but it's only like a one-time impact. From a truck perspective, for example, one global truck generation worth of battery materials need to be mined, but then they can be regurgitated, recycled all the time, assuming the battery chemistry doesn't change all that much in the end. And we tend to also have a development towards battery chemistries that are less intense, like LFP. Right now, it's going to be much more LFP in trucking, and maybe at some point even sodium-based chemistries. And even if they don't matter in trucking, they matter greatly in energy storage. So all of this will alleviate some of the pain points. It's not perfect. I would like it to be more perfect, but it's better than we feared it might be.
Thanks a lot. Please, Ida.
I want to comment about what Mr. said about bureaucracy.
We also have some in Germany, but
yeah, this is what I was about to say. Maybe my point of view will be seen as subjective, but I will share the words of international companies established in Morocco. Morocco is part of Africa. So it is by far we have very streamlined procedures, and to lower bureaucracy, we have created regional investment center in each region in Morocco, which is a focal point, one-stop shops, to create company and to solve all problems. This is not paradise, but we should start at somewhere. And I don't know if you have been in Africa, but I invite you to visit at least Morocco and to see by your own eyes. Maybe very surprised.
So before we come to the last point, a very quick round. Imagine in 10 years' time, you get out of the office. This office is for you, Andreas, it's in Africa. So you will switch your office. And a new car or a new vehicle, I have to say, is passing by. What kind of vehicle is it? What is the drivetrain? And where is it manufactured? Edna, you first. Drivetrain, and what kind of vehicle? Is it a truck? Is it a bus? Is it a pedelec? Or is it a scooter? Whatever. So Edna, your first choice. Where's your office in 10 years? Maybe Berlin.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm in Africa, so I'm in Kenya for sure, and I'm getting out of the office, and I would expect to see a locally assembled. I don't want to preempt manufacture because it's quite complex. I know we'll get there, but I'm hoping that it would be a locally assembled truck. I'm saying that for a reason, because I know that at least we do have an electric bus that is assembled already, so I'm hoping that it can be a truck that is locally assembled when I get out of the office. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Hopefully from...
At least you can use the bus also for freight. Ada, what kind of vehicle is it in Rabat, Casablanca?
In Africa, and
No,
I
in
hope
Morocco.
that
Morocco.
no,
Oh.
I hope it's in Africa,
Okay.
and I hope for Africa we will have many options, not only one option. Kind of vehicle ideally shared one to optimize. And,
Okay.
and public transport also, because it is very important and impactful in terms of e-mobility.
Yeah. And you also will win the World Championship in football in 2030, right?
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Eric, what is, I mean, for others it's quite clear in 10 years' time, isn't it? What is the vehicle you are looking at when you leave the office in 10 years' time?
Yeah, thank you so much. Actually, as you said, in Addis, it's already happening in terms of sustainable mobility, because we have this green corridor whereby you can just walk and cycle within the NMT system is already there. But in the 10 years time, I would go out of the office and see a BRT system that is electrified, and I'm able to see the scheduled bus service of that BRT, and I can know that if I take it at this time, I can reach my home at this place, and then I can be able to use NMT walking and cycling along the way. So maybe if we can have at least 5 cities in Africa, big cities in Africa, in that system, I think we'll have achieved something. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Last but not least, Andreas, what is it?
I think because I don't really have a common office, let's put it that way. I try to go for a weighted average of, like, I don't know, Lagos, Khartoum, Durban, etc. Because I think there's going to be different speeds still. And I'm famously honest, so I'm a bit more pessimistic about the modal shift. I think a lot of this will still look a bit like today, but I am much more optimistic, personally, when it comes to electrification, simply because it makes so much business sense. So I think much of this will be electric. I think it will still have a fair share of passenger cars and two-wheelers and trucks and so on like today. I think there will be some modal shift, but not quite the utopia at that point in time. But I think it will be surprisingly close to an utopia from a drivetrain perspective. And I believe that many of these batteries will still effectively, at least the IP, originate from East Asia. At the same time, however, I think that there's going to be much more local production of the products themselves. And the batteries can, of course, also be those factories more and more co-located with those production facilities too. So much of this is optimism, with a tiny hint of, yeah, some things take longer.
Thank you very much. And please join me. Another applaud for all of our panelists. And I would also like to ask you for another applaud to my honored colleagues from GIZ. With Daniel and Verena, we did all this work together, and it was a fantastic cooperation. Daniel and I worked a lot also already in China jointly 10 years back, and it feels like we work in the same organization, even if we will not rename ourselves. But thank you very much, Daniel and Verena, for the fantastic work your fantastic cooperation. So, the last thing I have to do is to hand over to Ingrid Hoven, who's a member of the board of GIZ and also member of our advisory council at Agora Transport Transformation. And as a host of this wonderful event, the last words are with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christian. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, excellencies, I think this was an amazing afternoon. With a lot of inspiration. I saw a lot of energy, actually. And we were not only talking about electrification and energy, but really I sense that there was so much inspiration coming from when I saw the African stories about what comes next. What is the new venture that we have to embrace? What I've also sensed this afternoon is that if we create these type of encounters, the dialogue, the platforms where we can bring together the African experience and the knowledge and the best practice cases, together with what we are actually experiencing here in Germany or in Europe. And we are also on a learning journey, quite frankly. And when I listen to your vision, what can be done in Africa in a few years' time, I would have liked that more perhaps members also of the German Parliament would have joined us this afternoon and would have actually listened to those numbers, to the new markets and the new opportunities that are emerging. With people, with the human capital that Africa is going to provide to an innovation that we all need for the planet and for the people worldwide. So this was really an amazing afternoon. And I also, concluded in my mind, actually, that we have always to be very clear about that what we are discussing here is not only about a technical shift. It's always very comforting when we learn from experts. This is doable. It pays off. This is a business case. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that we are speaking about big economic and societal changes. And sometimes when we see the papers and we have them at hand, this seems to be easier than in the implementation. And there again, I think working together can actually provide us with more confidence. We can share lessons learned of what is doable and what doesn't work so properly, and make actually progress constantly and quicker than if we walk alone. The cases that we have learned that exist already today are really amazing. The numbers from Kenya with respect to electric vehicles that are multiplying on the roads and already account for 7% of the new registration. The examples from Senegal or Morocco, we had a colleague on the panel, what is already happening there and what kind of numbers of electric cars that we can already count on Moroccan roads. I think we should really make sure that these good messages, good narratives, and good best practices are being spread, not only in these communities that deal with innovative mobility concepts, but I think we have to spread these news when we talk to business people, when we talk to business association, and also when it comes to the climate process. I'm just coming back from Berlin, and I was comparing a little bit how much attention transport issues got in comparison to renewable energy issues. And I think there's still a gap, but this can be improved because you in Africa, you have a huge opportunity. COP32 in 2027 in Addis. And if you collect all these good practices, the innovation that is already moving the mobility towards a sustainable one in Africa, I think there is a big chance really to put this on top of the agenda, on the radar screen of decision makers. And I can tell you that then this might not only bring momentum to investments decision in Africa and for Africa, by domestic investors or by international ones, but it could also create momentum worldwide for those regions and countries where there is perhaps less confidence that really leapfrogging mobility is the way to go, and that others should follow your example. So thank you for the aspiration. Thank you for the great partnership. A big thank also to Agora Verkehrswende for partnering with GIZ. And let me close by saying thank you, a big thank to all of those that have organized this discussion, this dialogue, and also now the smaller reception. Please stay with us, join us for a chat to continue the dialogue, and please stay tuned and optimistic that this is really a good vision and is doable. Thank you so much.